Yo, what is up, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video. Today, we're going to talk about Bradley Beal, and in my opinion, it is long overdue, and it is time to trade him. Bradley Beal has been a Wizard for a while. He's had some really great seasons, but at this point, there's not a lot of benefit to keeping Bradley Beal around, especially when we look towards the offseason. Now, last offseason, every time a team got eliminated from the playoffs, I made a What's Next video where I talked about what I thought they should do going into the offseason, what kind of their options were. And for the Wizards, my recommended option was I thought it was time to trade both Westbrook and Beal. You tried the experiment and it just didn't work, and it felt like those two were at the highest value they were going to be at for a little bit, so maybe it was time to move on. They ended up moving on from Westbrook, trying to rebuild this team around Bradley Beal, bringing in pieces like Spencer Dinwiddie. In free agency, you brought in Kyle Kuzma in the Westbrook trade, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Montrezl Harrell. You tried to bring in some more depth-based pieces to build around Bradley Beal as your star, and for a little bit, it was working pretty well. They were off to a pretty good start in the Eastern Conference, and they've completely fallen off a cliff, including that awful loss recently to the Clippers, blowing a 30-plus point lead, and so now it is time. I think everyone's kind of realized that it's time to do this. I got a lot of pushback from Wizards fans when I recommended trading him, and I get that. I'm someone who's seen multiple franchise players leave as a Thunder fan, so I get how much that hurts and how much you don't want to see that happen, but it's past the point. I feel like most of the Wizards fans are kind of on my side at this point, at least the ones that I've interacted with on Twitter. Everyone kind of seems to be in consensus it's time to trade Bradley Beal, so this video in itself isn't really a hot take. But when you kind of look at the circumstances that are surrounding him right now, things get a lot more interesting. Bradley Beal is in the last year of his contract, and there are rumors, for a while it's kind of been set that even if he's not winning, Beal wants to try and win in Washington, and I can respect that loyalty. But now there's rumors that Beal's not super happy in Washington. There's been rumors that there's a rift between recent signee Spencer Dinwiddie and Bradley Beal, and that he might not re-sign with the Wizards. He kind of might want out, and that he's open to a trade. And now there's rumors coming out that maybe the Sixers are interested in doing a Ben Simmons for Bradley Beal swap. And so there's a lot of rumors circulating for kind of the first time in a couple seasons. Beal's always been a guy that a lot of people have thought could get moved just because of the Wizards situation, being stuck in mediocrity for a while, but also just because he's kind of one of those guys that seems like he would be a pretty good plug-and-play fit on almost any team. He's a scorer, he's a shooter, he can do pretty much whatever you need him to do. He's not a great defender, but he can plug in at pretty much any team shooting guard position, and it seems like they would improve. So he's just a guy that has kind of been on the table for a while, and now more than ever, it feels like maybe there's a chance that he could get moved even by the deadline. That kind of seems maybe a little early, maybe that really isn't going to happen, but it's interesting to think about because there are a lot of big names out there on the market that maybe could want Bradley Beal. So let's look at kind of what it would look like if the Wizards did retain him. The worry is, yes, of course, you're only like a little over a week from the trade deadline, so you don't want to be rushed into trading him and trading him for nothing, but if you retain him past this deadline, I don't really think it benefits you very much. This team's not very good. Right now, they're looking like a play-in team at best. The Eastern Conference is super deep, and now Beal's out for a week with an injury. There's a chance that by the time he comes back, they've fallen out of the play-in tournament. That's how close the Eastern Conference is, despite the Wizards' hot start. So your team's not really good enough. They're stuck in this mediocrity, and even if they sign Bradley Beal, which we'll talk about the contract they're going to have to sign him to in a second, they're probably going to be kind of stuck here unless they can bring in a second star, and that doesn't really look like a super realistic option. Maybe they try and bring in like a Sabonis or something. They've been rumored to have interest in him, but to me personally, a Beal and Sabonis duo doesn't really do much for me in terms of moving them up in the Eastern Conference. Right now, it feels like they need a superstar. They need a lot more than a guy like Sabonis to come in and change this team from a play-in team to an actual contending team. So they're stuck in that mediocrity phase that they've kind of been stuck in for the past few years. And if you do bring back Bradley Beal, not only are you kind of sticking in that mediocrity, but you're going to be locked up with him on a super max contract. Because right now, he is eligible for one of those in the offseason. It's why he's going to decline his player option, because he wants more years, and if the Wizards sign him back, he can get that supermax. You know what a supermax looks like for Bradley Beal? Around $50 million. That's so, on a 4 or 5 year deal, that is a lot of money for a guy like Bradley Beal. Now, Beal's great. He is having a down season and all, which I'll talk about in a second, but you don't want to be paying him that much money, especially when he's 28 going on 29. He's going to be like 33, 34. And with that much money for a guy that doesn't have a lot of, he as kind of a scorer like he is, I'm not quite sure. I don't think he's going to be bad by the end of that contract, but he is not going to be worth that contract at the end of it. That is going to be a bad contract. And that's only a contract you want to give out if you're trying to contend. Like if he gets traded to a contending team and they want to keep Bradley Beal around, sure, they could give him a big contract. I think that makes a lot more sense than the Wizards giving him that big contract to stay around and be mediocre. Plus, his trade value has kind of dropped. He was, like I mentioned, he's expiring at the end of the season, so any team that could trade for him, there is the possibility that Beal's going to just leave. And that's scary for a lot of teams. So I don't think you're going to get as much as you might get, especially if you get to the offseason, and the best you can do is a sign and trade if you do want to trade him, and those usually don't result in very many assets. At least it wouldn't result in as many assets if you trade him now at the deadline. So there's a lot of risk for teams trading for him, so his value is down, and I really think it could only drop more when you reach the point where at that point it's a sign and trade, and a lot of teams are going to be like, nah, I'll just try and sign him right out. So there are a lot of things to consider. You don't want to rush into anything if you're the Wizards because he is your biggest trade piece, but on the other hand, you risk losing him for nothing. And if out of the Westbrook and Beal duo, you end up with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Kyle Kuzma, and Montrezl Harrell from those two guys, that is a massive failure on the side of the front office. There is always the possibility of a sign and trade 100%. And an option that I'm going to talk about in a second, I think might be available for a sign and trade coming into the offseason, depending whether that team trades the big piece that I'm talking about. But that's always up in the air. You never quite know. What if Bradley Beal just wants to go play someone that has a bunch of cap space? He's like, I'll go to some random team, and you don't get anything for him. It's not something that the Wizards can really afford to start their rebuild. They could get some young pieces, and the big guy that I am talking about on the market is, of course, Ben Simmons. I mentioned him earlier in the video, and there's a rumor from The Athletic that a Ben Simmons for Bradley Beal swap is on the table, that the Sixers would be interested in trading Ben Simmons for Bradley Beal. Now, they have said that they don't want to include a Tyrese Maxey or Matisse Thybulle. I don't think Maxey's gettable. I think Maxey, the way that he's been playing, is probably untouchable for Philadelphia when they throw in Ben Simmons. I'm sure they would trade Maxey for Beal, like, with some smaller pieces, but in terms of if you're going to trade Ben Simmons, Philly's not going to give up Tyrese Maxey in addition. That would just have them too far out of a point guard at that point. Who runs point? Bradley Beal or Furkan Korkmaz, I guess. That's just not happening the way that he's played. But if you can somehow get Matisse Thybulle and Ben Simmons for Bradley Beal, you pull that trigger. If I'm the Washington Wizards, if that deal comes up on my desk, I'm pulling that trigger immediately. Ben Simmons is a young piece that you can build around and focus your rebuild on. If you're going to trade a guy like Bradley Beal, you want to bring in a young player. An example of trading like a big name star that kind of seems to want out is Paul George. The Thunder traded Paul George, and they got back a young star to build around in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Of course, they brought in a bunch of draft picks too, but probably the number one thing that you're looking for when you're trading for that is a young star. You want to have someone young to build around, someone to keep the fans excited. And I think a guy like Ben Simmons could come into the Wizards and he could keep fans excited. Sure, the Wizards aren't going to be great if they do trade Bradley Beal, and you need to make sure, of course, that Ben Simmons wants to be there because he has shown that if he doesn't want to be somewhere, he's not going to show up. But if he is kind of interested in playing in Washington, being that guy that they can try and build around, I think there's some merit to bring in a guy like Ben Simmons. And if you can get Matisse Thybulle, an all-defensive caliber guy, maybe even a future defensive player of the year, that's a pretty good return. Maybe you even get a pick or two. Who knows? I'm not quite sure what the package would look like because Ben Simmons' trade value, as well as Bradley Beal's, are kind of all over the place for some people. But if you can get a Ben Simmons deal, you should take it because it might not be there in the offseason. If you get to the offseason and Philly still is looking for someone to trade, sure, maybe a Bradley Beal sign and trade with Ben Simmons still works out. Or Philly goes out and gets like a James Harden and then you lose out on that big piece that you could have gotten. It's a possibility. So you can't wait too long. Other teams that I could see maybe interested in trading for him, maybe like the Atlanta Hawks. I don't think Trae Young and Bradley Beal would be the best fit defensively. I don't think they're stopping anyone in the backcourt, but maybe they would be interested in throwing like a John Collins, Bogdan Bogdanovic type package. I don't know if they'd be willing to throw in like a DeAndre Hunter. Probably not. That probably seems like a little bit too much, but they might be interested in bringing in a guy like Bradley Beal because they have been rumored to want a secondary star next to Trae Young. John Collins doesn't seem to be that guy, so maybe you could get something like that, and I think that's a pretty decent package. You'd probably get some picks in there as well. Maybe from the Heat, you could get like Tyler Hero. You'd probably have to take on like Duncan Robinson's contract, which isn't amazing, but he is still a shooter, kind of, could help out a little bit, keep the team kind of fun. Tyler Hero could be a young piece to try and build around. He's been phenomenal as a six man. So maybe you could go out and get a guy like him, get some picks as well. Although the Heat don't have many picks in general, so not quite sure what that deal would look like. These are just kind of hypotheticals, by the way, not saying these are going to happen. And then maybe even you could call up the Grizzlies and see if Maybe they would be interested in parting with Desmond Bane. I don't think they would, but you could at least call and check that out. Because if the Grizzlies see themselves as being a team that's kind of on the cusp, maybe bringing in an elite scorer like Bradley Beal next to a John Morant could interest them a lot. So maybe they'd be considering it to do that. And if even not that, they still have some interesting young pieces outside, like a Dylan Brooks, a Zaire Williams, just amongst some other guys. Maybe you could even get like a Brandon Clark out of it or something. So those are just quite a couple packages. I'm not saying those are great deals, but those might be what's available for Bradley Beal. And I do think the concept of bringing in some of those young guys, trying to kind of just rejuvenate things, is interesting, especially when you consider the fact that you have other pieces to trade. You have Spencer Dinwiddie. I know his contract's not great, but I'm sure some team would be willing to take a chance on him when he is in kind of a lesser role than he is right now. I think he can maybe excel a lot more. I think they're asking a lot of him. And right now he's coming off of an ACL injury, so it is going to take him some time to get back to the player that he was. It's looked like a pretty bad signing so far, but maybe there's still something in there to salvage. Kyle Kuzma is playing the best basketball of his career right now, so I'm sure some team would be willing to bring him back to them for maybe like a young piece or like a pick and like a role player, something like that. I'm sure you could get a decent package for him. Montrezl Harrell, I think, is a bench piece that any contender would maybe like to bring in for some scoring. And then even a guy like Thomas Bryant, maybe you could get like a couple second round picks or just like an okay player for him. You have pieces that you can deal off to kind of make this work better. Additionally, there's also still time to tank. The season is only like a little over halfway over. And with how good the Eastern Conference is, if the Wizards bottom out, if they trade all these guys like I'm talking about, they could be on the cusp of a top 5, top 6, top 7 pick. And with the current lottery odds, there's a decent chance you could even jump up into the top 5. And then you could add a young piece in this really interesting draft class. There's a lot of fun prospects in this draft class. Add a guy from this draft class to like a Ben Simmons or like whoever you get in one of those packages, and you've got like a decent rebuild going forward. So those are my thoughts on Bradley Beal. I just kind of think it's time to move him, and I think Wizards fans are starting to agree with me. I think most NBA fans believe that it's time to do it. I kind of just wanted to put all this out there. Let me know if you think the Wizards should trade Bradley Beal, or am I crazy? Let me know what package you would kind of want to see if you're a Wizards fan, or just what you think is a good piece that the Wizards should target for a guy like Bradley Beal. And do you think they should hold on to him, trade him at the deadline? Let me know all of that in the comment section below. I appreciate y'all watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. I'll see y'all later. Real One, say it back.